Howdy, y'all. Welcome to the Utopian Hub, where we look at scholarly works in utopian studies and discuss them with non-experts. I'm Donald Zarate, a first-year graduate student at the University of California, Riverside in the Political Science Department, and this video revolves around the book Facial Justice by L.P. Hartley. I'm joined here by Jessica
Maccaro.
Maccaro,
Not the only one.
a fourth-year graduate student in the Entomology department
Mhm.
at my university. Jess's research includes symbiosis spanning from pathogenic to mutualistic relationships. Jess, thank you for being here. Can you tell me a little bit more about your research?
Symbiosis is actually the spectrum, and all it really means is things living together and co-evolving sometimes together. So living together can obviously span from parasitic to mutualistic. My research actually spans that whole spectrum. Some of it has been studying bees and fungal pathogens. So how these fungi come to cause disease in bees, and I study their genomes, so their DNA, and at the genetic level, how is that happening? And my last part of my dissertation is actually going to be about how our different fields, like human fields, you study utopias, I study entomology. How can these different fields come together in a mutualistic way? And sort of I'm studying the benefit of transdisciplinary collaborations, and what does symbiosis look like in a social system.
Getting into the book L.P. Hartley's Facial Justice, which came out in 1960, it revolves around a female protagonist named Jael 97 in a post-apocalyptic society surviving in the ruined wastelands of Great Britain. She's a member of the highest ranks of society, called Alpha Pluses, and she always felt like she lacked her own sense of identity. So one day she took something sharp and cut her own face, creating a permanent scar. She was immediately named a failed alpha, and people started talking behind her back. While you needn't have read Facial Justice to follow along with our conversation, you can find more information about this book and access my summary in the video's description. So our story begins when Jael is heading to the Equalization or Faces Center to get a new face. While going there, she ran into her friend Judith 91, who convinced her that she's beautiful the way she was.
Well, I guess I would have to ask you a little bit more about the society and sort of what it means to be an alpha plus.
So the casts are really interesting because they're never really explicitly talked about. They're described in the way they interact with each other and the way they perceive each other. So they're hierarchical in the sense that everyone recognizes the authority of an alpha over a beta and a beta over a gamma. But that's about it. The other groups just kind of make fun of them for the minus, and then each group finds pride in the plus, in the good one.
Okay.
So alphas work too much is one of them. Whereas betas, they're beta beautiful.
So a minus is like a failed, or what are the plus and minuses?
It's just a subset of that group. So an alpha plus is better than an alpha minus, but again, we don't know what distinguishes them. When Jael was named a failed alpha, she was actually demoted to beta.
Okay.
So she was a alpha plus.
Yeah.
And she became a beta.
She was beautiful when she was an alpha plus, and then when she became an alpha minus, then there was envy. Do you want to expand on that?
So alpha plus is part of what makes an alpha plus is that they're beautiful. So when she was beautiful among her peers, and so she was just like everyone else in her group. But when she was a beta, she was still beautiful despite her scar. She was still beautiful, but she was alpha level beautiful, which was more beautiful than other betas.
Yeah.
So that's what the invoked envy from her peers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about envy as this way of showing that there isn't equality, right? Like there's no envy if there's full equality, right? And
that's what they're trying to get rid of, and that's why she was going to get a new face. She wasn't going there. She was going voluntarily in that no one made her. She was recommended to go. She was given an appointment and she was told that she should report there. And the goal was to change her face so she would no longer be facially privileged.
Your question about how can a society that prides itself on having achieved the highest form of justice have these articles that are still open to interpretation.
Yeah, so not articles in the constitutional sense, but what is beautiful, what is appropriate, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
If everyone's equal, then that's it. Equality is equality, but it seems like it's still open to interpretation.
When I go to the social insect world and I think about the different caste systems, like ants, for example, they are born into whatever caste they're going to be based on environmental conditions. Like if there's, you know, a limitation of food, for example, they will make more foragers to get more food. So there's like this sort of like flexibility in terms of like the caste system is directly responsive to what is needed for the colony as a whole. So I guess that's the sense in which certain castes are better than others, is just for like the needs of that specific context, that society at that time. And that's why I'm trying to think about that with this.
This does relate because like I said, they don't really describe the castes absolutely, but there is a sense that the alphas have better jobs. They do more what we might call educated work in like lawyers, doctors, writers, even artists. Whereas I don't know what distinguishes the betas from gammas, but betas and gammas are usually like the street workers, the trashmen, the construction workers, etc. We can move on to the next question, which is the main character. She's named 97 because all the people in the society are named after a famous murderer in history. There's 96 others with the same name. 97 is a very interesting prime number. I listed it in the other document I gave you, but just there's a lot of prime related reasons why it's really unique. But Jael is actually a biblical figure, and they were known for murdering a king, basically a person who was attacking the country. She lured them into a tent and killed them, ending the war, but she murdered them through deceit. And so, as a writer, why would you decide to have your main character named after a larger than life and literally prime biblical figure? But then when she was going to the facial equalization center, she was saved to not get her face changed by her friend Judith 91. And Judith is an interesting name in that there's no significant murderer with that name in history, and that 91 is a very insignificant number in terms of prime figures. So a larger than life, literally prime biblical figure was saved by a relative nobody.
Well, I guess I'm interested in your use of the word saved. Like saved is basically like staying the same and not conforming to the norms, right? Like
so
in this case.
What I mean by it is that she was prevented from doing what she did not want to do. She didn't want to get her face changed, but she felt like she had to. But then her friends just like, no, just don't.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's the power of the nobody, right? Like, or the people on the fringes, is that they don't need to follow the rules because they're already like on the fringes, already ostracized. There's no like real need to stay in line. And I don't know, I think about that a lot as somebody who I feel like I'm on the fringes all the time, especially doing this transdisciplinary work. Like I'm always on the edge of different disciplines and stuff. And so, and being queer, it's like you're kind of like always in this position where you're in a liminal space and it doesn't really like matter what you do because you're already on the edge. So I feel like in that sense, a relative nobody like has been able to like not have to conform to the norms for a while.
All right, so the next set of scenes, the excursion. After resolving not to change her face, Jael ends up going on an excursion to the countryside. Excursions are basically trips to the countryside via bus rides, but the ruler of Jael society, known as the dictator, accuses the excursions of being against the values of the state. Now, the dictator isn't an elected ruler, and no one is forced to listen to him in a typical law and order kind of way. But everyone does because he's the one who helped reorganize everyone after the last nuclear war. To dissuade people from going on excursions, though, the dictator pulls some strings and makes it so that way 1 out of every 6 buses will meet with an accident. He then announces it to the public. But that actually makes everybody want to go. While Jael was on one of the excursions, her bus was one of the ones chosen. But before that, she started and encouraged those around her to physically look up, like to tilt their heads and look up, engaging in the forbidden concept of height. So my question for you is, How could a society function if even height was taboo? Is
Mhm.
this a farce?
I mean, yeah, like to me, height symbolized this idea of transcendence or of separation, right? Like or I guess hierarchy, right? Like you're only higher if you're like on top of something, right? Like that concept of being separated vertically. Whereas I think the society and this concept of equality is trying to make it seem like everyone's on the same
Hmm.
level, right? And that you shouldn't be like looking up because that's almost invoking difference,
Hmm.
and then that difference is a source of inequality and then injustice, right? So I guess at the same time, like, why is she trying to promote that? And I guess, like, to me as well, height could represent looking up towards something like imagination, right? Like,
Yeah. So what? For more
yeah.
context, on the excursion they went to a destroyed cathedral,
Hmm.
and of the cathedral's remains, the only thing that was there was one of its towers. And so Jael looked up to look at the tower, and she
Yeah.
was imagining what it was attached to.
Too. I mean, it's interesting, like that it was a church too, because like I mean, looking up is like looking up to the heavens, right? That's usually like what people associate it with, and then the heavens being this like sense of transcendentalism. And I think that also like what we've been talking about with like there's just a strong emphasis in this book about individualism,
Hmm.
right? And I think that like that's usually tied to this idea of transcendence, like you're transcending like I guess um the idea of like how do I connect these? Like, um, I feel like there's always been this sort of like spatial metaphor with height where people like philosophers have to go up on a mountain by
Hmm.
themselves, like high
Oh
above
yeah.
everything else, right? And they have to be alone and apart from things to be able to come to like
Well, see, what's interesting about that is that by virtue of this being an excursion, she was away from the
yeah.
rest of society.
Right, right. So like all of these things that just kind of like represent like taking yourself outside and above, like to ultimately, I guess, see it differently, right? And so that's like where imagination comes in because you get a different perspective, like from
Hmm.
above or outside of, right? And